Just doing a quick audio test. Test 1, 2, 3.
Open the meeting.
Sure. Gotta find that mute button. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Education and Policy Committee meeting on November 2nd already, in November. I will turn it over to, I believe Mr. Link is on the first go around for the second quarter instructional model update.
Thank you. Just wanted to remind everyone that last Friday I had sent out the message to employees in the community that we would be continuing with the hybrid blended model through the second quarter based on the county designation and recommendation from our healthcare partners. Since then, there's been some updated information as recently as this morning. The Department of Education has updated their county designation in conjunction with the Department of Health for Lehigh County in particular. Also this morning, I participated in an online meeting along with the other superintendents in the county with the Department of Education and the Department of Health, and they confirmed that Lehigh County is now in the substantial transmission designation. They are recommending that we stay in our current model to see how this week's data, to see what this week's data indicates at the end of this week, early next week when they release the updated numbers. The reason why they do that is they like to see basically two 7-day periods of data to see if it remains consistent. So at the end of this week, beginning of this next week, if we were to remain in the substantial level or substantial designation for transmission, PDE indicated this morning that they would release a statement recommending that schools in Lehigh County go to the fully remote model. However, that it's only a recommendation and it would remain a local decision. So we'll be watching the numbers closely throughout this week. Also to watch numbers of transmission within our immediate area of Lehigh County and Walnutport and Northampton County, as well as within our own school buildings. So that's the most recent information. That's the update from the letter and the communication that went out to the community last Friday evening. Any questions on that or?
Mr. Link, is there going to be any communication to be sent out prior to looking at those numbers for the rest of the week? Now that I know you just sent that out and said that we're going to stay, but now that there's been some additional communication, is that going to go out to the community as well?
Yes, I've actually started kind of drafting some thoughts probably as early as tomorrow afternoon, early evening. Just to inform people that this is now the most recent message, the most recent designation, change in designation for the county, and the information shared out by PDE and Department of Health this morning. I won't be able to give anybody an answer tomorrow, but I can let them know that this is the current dialogue and an update in status.
Thank you.
Sure. Again, in some ways, I feel a little bit like we're back in, August leading up to the opening of the school year. As we go deeper into the winter and the colder months, it seems like the guidance is becoming more frequent from PDE, and the environment keeps changing. So that was it. I just wanted to share out that most recent information this evening. If there's no other questions on that topic, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Stoker and the principals.
Thank you, Mr. Link.
You're welcome.
The next topic on the education policy agenda for education is an overview of accessing online platform from a family perspective. So we've had some discussions at Ed Policy and board meetings, and also through some of the feedback that we received through other meetings in the district, like our family engagement meeting, about how it's going for families. So we said that we would put this on this agenda to come back and discuss a little bit further. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to the principals. Maybe we can start at the elementary level and talk about how it's been going at the elementary level and some of the things that we're going to do in order to address some of the concerns that families are having, and then we'll go into the secondary level after that. So Mr. Pine, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. So I'm actually going to read a statement. Mr. Schneider wasn't able to be here, but he had sent me a statement just to kind of read to summarize where things are at Peters. He had indicated, at Peters Elementary School, most of the feedback has come directly from parents or from our monthly parent engagement meetings. The initial issues revolved around accessing the online programs and getting accustomed to the expectations. We worked internally to address these issues. Teachers have done an outstanding job with communicating with families whenever there's a question regarding Google Classroom, the learning management system we use at Peters. Teachers have also worked to streamline the educational offerings to make accessing information easier. I created a video for each grade level designed for people who have little background or experience in the fundamentals of the technology that we're using. These videos have been sent to families and are currently on the school website. At the most recent family engagement meetings, Mr. Pine and I had Mr. Pine and I had the opportunity to speak with those in attendance and kind of show them what things look like from a student perspective. After the presentations, there were a few questions, but one concern that arose was regarding communication. If there are parents with children who are at multiple buildings, to improve communication practices at Peters, we're now posting any pertinent communications that go to all families to Google Classroom. Although this may sound redundant, it is easier for families with multiple children to confirm with children about the communication from the teachers. We recorded that family engagement meeting, and so we have that. It's not perfectly produced. We're not video editors, but it does kind of have the walkthroughs of those Google Classrooms in various content areas and at various grades. So if at any time anyone's interested in viewing that, we have the videotape sort of walking through what some of the Google Classrooms look like. Similarly, at Slayton's Elementary, there were a couple of big items that came out of the commentary from the survey that we immediately started trying to tackle. One of them was parents having uncertainty about how to log in and get into some of the management pieces, particularly if they were taking them out of Google Classroom. So Google Classroom was pretty streamlined and pretty straightforward, but some of the programs we use for our curriculum, such as, let's say, Wonders or some of the associated materials with Eureka, they're online, require additional steps to log in. With that, the teachers at each of those levels have created a number of videos in order to sort of walk through that process for parents and get them in there. As Mr. Schneider had pointed out, I think a lot at the beginning of the year was overwhelming. I mean, there was just a lot. And right now, I just met with teachers last Wednesday over an hour period throughout the course of the entire day in small groups. And, it seems like a lot of that has settled down in terms of their ability to access. One of the other items that we got for feedback at Slayton Elementary was in relation to having hard copy materials and being able to manage multiple tabs at a time. So sometimes having to read something and then work on an ed puzzle or some program. So in response to that, we ended up sending out to our families to be kept at home many of our hard copy materials, knowing that within the school building, we were going to be better equipped and better able to figure out how to teach the kids how to manage those multiple screens at times. And that at home, that would at least reduce what was seeming to be a pain point, a real frustration point for people. And then finally, one of the things that we're working on right now is, in addition to the family engagement meetings, and this applies to both Slayton and Peters, is trying to set up some sort of parent school workshops over the course of the year in order to have teachers at various content areas and with various types of expertise, present to parents strategies that they may be able to use in order to better bridge the gap between school at home and home during these difficult times. So right now, the first one that we're looking to do, and we're trying to get that in before parent-teacher conferences this year, is in response to a problem that's been very, very clear, which is that a lot of our families just don't know how to do this. You know, when it comes down to, going through the educational steps, even when a teacher is planning out what's going out there, they don't know how to do things like that. Sometimes even setting up spaces in the home, sometimes setting up schedules and structures, incentive systems like we use in our positive behavior support piece. Those types of fundamental pieces that, we really leverage to make students successful across content areas seems to be something that we're identifying over and over again is a place where people need help. So before the end of this month, Mrs. Bile, who's our emotional support teacher, she's putting it together right now, going to be putting together a presentation. And I mean, she is bar none, one of the best I've ever seen in intuitively responding to students and understanding how to leverage positivity as a way to, get them moving in the right direction. And so she's going to be doing that. And then we're looking to follow up during parent-teacher conferences where she has availability in her schedule to kind of schedule in some consultation time with different families about some of the different topics they need assistance with. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Pine. Does anybody have any questions about that at the elementary level before we move into the secondary level?
Hi, it's Michelle Heckman. I do just have one question. How often are the parent engagement meetings?
So the parent engagement meetings that James and I are running, they're every month. We're running those every month. We've got a schedule out for those. The ones that we're trying to get jump started here, where we're having teachers with varying expertise, I can't say for sure. Right now, I'm trying to put together a list and put together kind of an agenda for what that might look like over the course of the year. But at the very least, there will be a meeting once a month with Mr. Schneider and myself.
So do you think that's going to start in November or December?
No, we actually already started in October. We had our first one in October. We have another one in November. Hold on, I can tell you the date. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with keeping track of dates. I gotta have a calendar.
Wait, are you talking about the general parent meetings or more of the workshop style where we're going to teach parents like a concept, or let's call it a virtual school hack?
Yeah. Hey, that sounds great. I might steal that. I was actually talking about the general ones. We have those planned out. So that's the next one's November 17th. But the first one that we're looking to run with Mrs. Bile in terms of all those sort of fundamentals, in the virtual and remote learning environment, we're looking to have that established in November. I spoke with her a little bit more about it today. We kind of set up an outline for it. I should be releasing a date before the end of the week.
Okay. So great. That's great. Especially if we are looking into the future and assuming the worst, obviously, of course, parents don't 100% know what to do because nobody knows 100% what to do in this scenario, and they're teaching 2 days a week. So I think that if we're going to do some, like you said, workshop, I'm just going to call it a workshop, to help parents either master skills, learn how to cope with being at home better. Obviously, teaching tools. These parents aren't necessarily trained teachers as our wonderful staff is. So I think that those definitely need to be more than one time a month if we're going to have to go fully virtual this winter. That's just my 2 cents.
This is Gary. I want to say I sat in on that meeting last month, and I was very impressed. And I must say that many of the questions that were even asked at the board meeting from parents and so forth were answered by our principals. They explained everything so well, I think, and most of the parents, if not all of the parents at that point, seemed to be very happy with what was being said to them and gave a different understanding. One of the things that was constantly said by people was that we needed our teachers to really communicate with the parents uniformly. But I think that has also been looked at by the administration. So I just want to say it was a great meeting. I did listen into it, and I will say that to both of our elementary principals, great job. Thank you.
And I would just like to add that, I have to commend Mr. Pine and Mr. Schneiderite for those meetings, because they don't just take what everybody is saying and, jot down notes. They actually make those actionable items. So whatever feedback we're getting from parents, they really take it to heart, and they really, bring that back into their buildings to try to change and try to better the programs that we have at the elementary. And one of those was, with regard to communication and using the tools. So I hear you, Michelle, when you're talking about potentially having more than one of those a month. We're just trying to really get the first one up and off the ground, and try to make it something that families can really use right now, which we're trying to look at potentially scheduling at home and creating a schedule for children to learn, and then from there continuing to branch out. Maybe looking at how do you teach certain content areas, or looking at how do you use certain tools online like Google Classroom, those types of things. So we certainly have a lot of topics I think that we can cover. We're just trying to really get that first one up and running, and then go from there. So certainly I think more to come on that.
Thank you. Mr. Pine, just a quick question, and maybe you can just let the community know where they can find that information of when those dates are. Are they posted on the calendar, or are they in your email you sent out? Where can they find them, and how can they access that in case somebody wants to do that who may not be on this call, or how is the community finding out about them?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So I've been putting all the information in the newsletter. I hesitate to call it a weekly newsletter because some weeks I don't have enough to fill, so I don't just send one out. But it's been almost that. I mean, I think I've missed 1 week so far since the school year has begun. So I've been putting that out. I mean, if you're ever looking for any of the information that's been in previous ones, that always remains posted. I've been putting it out through Class Dojo, our Twitter account, and our Facebook page. I think that's it. And then the Connect, the Blackboard Connect community outreach messages that we put out. So, yeah, if you're looking at that newsletter, that always has the information in it as we go through the weeks. I think we'll be sending out this week probably the RSVP information with the form and asking people to sign up, and if there are any topics they'd like to see us discuss.
Thank you. And then I have one other question that maybe you can answer. There's been some discussion around if somebody is fully virtual versus the hybrid model and what that instruction looks like. Could you just go into a little bit of what that expectation is for a student who is hybrid, the communication with the teacher, versus if the student is virtual, and what the expectation is of that student teacher collaboration?
Sure. Yeah. So the students who are hybrid, obviously they're in the school 2 days a week. Their communication with the teacher is much more asynchronous during the days that they're out of school. Some teachers, as they're able to, will set up times and then tell the class, hey, listen, if you have a question, you can stop by at this time. On Wednesdays, all students, virtual or hybrid, and I can speak for sure about Slating Elementary. I think it is the same at Peters. All students, virtual or hybrid, do have a schedule throughout the course of the first half of the day, where they would meet based on content areas, in case they have any questions. And also that's a time where teachers, if they're identifying that there are things that need to be retaught or reviewed, that they're reteaching or reviewing during that time. That's the time where they have to do that. And they would have access to all of their students at that time on Wednesdays. For the students who are virtual, that also is true on Wednesdays. But then Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, they also have a schedule throughout the day, where the teachers have class time. That doesn't necessarily mean 90 minutes of on the screen with the teacher time. Sometimes it's broken up over the 90 minutes, and the teachers and the students are in at one point, and then they're working on something and then back in. And sometimes it is. Sometimes the teacher is, directly in there with the students over the course of that entire time. But yeah, the expectation, and I say expectation loosely because we realize we have, situations where families are not able to meet that expectation. We work with them. The expectation, the hope is that students in the virtual environment are getting that contact every day with that teacher, those teachers who are assigned to that. And again, in the hybrid, I don't want to say trade-off, but the trade-off is, yes, there is that direct contact on those days when the students are in school, but it's a little bit more asynchronous and flexible on the days that they're out of school.
Any
Scott,
other
I have a
questions?
quick question. This is Bob Kern.
Go ahead, Mr. Kern.
All right, thank you. I, as a grandparent of a second grader, have been taking on 2 days of the virtual learning with my granddaughter for scheduling difficulties at work for my son and my daughter-in-law. My question is it possible to get those videos that we've been talking about with directions and guidance? I mean, I'm an ex-educator. It's a little easier for me. But judging by what I see on the Zoom meetings that my granddaughter has on Wednesdays, the children that are involved in the Zoom meeting, they're at aunts' houses, they're at grandparents' houses. I'm going to say probably over half of those students aren't in their regular homes with their parents who are receiving this information. Is there a way, as a grandparent who's in charge of this virtual part of things, to get access to those types of things that may be helpful, that you've been discussing? I don't know of any communique out there to the community saying, hey, it's on our website, or, go here or go there so that you can access that. And if that information isn't given from the parent to the caretaker, that will get lost. And that's kind of my fear. And the second thing I'm going to say is the most difficult thing that I'm going to tell you from practical experience is having a second grader with zero keyboard skills, obviously on the laptop or their Chromebook, and the amount of time it takes for that child to even spell out one sentence, let alone 3 or 4 in a paragraph, is an unbelievable task. And I think a lot of that is the frustration where I basically switched it around where, I have her handwrite it first, and then we go back and then I end up helping her type it. I mean, otherwise we'd be there pretty much 6-7 hours, and I'm not lying to you. So there's a lot of things that people need to adjust to. But my main concern is that access to those videos for the caretakers, not necessarily the parents. Thank you.
So, Mr. Kern, since you were talking about a second grader in Peters, and Mr. Schneiderites can't be with us this evening, I'll kind of address it from Peters, and then Mr. Pine, if you want to jump in from Slatington as well. I know that in the feedback that we've been getting from family members, whether they be parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, with regard to, how do we access these tools? How do we, manipulate some of the things that we're asked to do within the Google Classroom or even Google Classroom itself? We've been trying to collect the videos because at some points there were teachers that were finding if, they were getting feedback from any family members that they were having difficulty doing something, either that particular teacher or that grade level created like a little video to post within their Google Classroom for families. We don't know everybody that posted those little videos. So the principals are working right now on collecting all of that information and getting all of those videos together to find out what we already have created so that we don't have to recreate things if they already exist. And then beyond that, we're looking to create those workshops for additional items that family members are struggling with, so that we can create those workshops and make them more focused while also publishing those videos that already exist. So we're trying to take both of those pieces together to try to assist family members better.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that was my biggest concern. The information sometimes isn't transferred from parent, to the caretaker. The communication might not be there, or, they're not as educational savvy. Those are my concerns. And, I just want to make sure that if a caretaker wants to get at it, there it is, it's readily available. That's all.
Sure, absolutely. We hear you, and we're trying to address that. We're just right now kind of in that collection mode. Scott, okay. I don't know if there's anything that, I'm sorry. Scott, I don't know if there's anything you want to add from Slatington.
No, I was going to say, that's a great idea. And part of that is that we sort of already have been thinking in that direction. And, honestly, it wasn't even with the thought of what you're saying, Mr. Kern, which I think is a great point to raise, that there are these other families. It was more of, we're putting these things out sort of in response, reactively, and that it would be really, really helpful if we could catalog all those. And it also, it helps us maybe reduce redundancy. Instead of having every teacher put out a Wonders video about logging into Wonders, if we have someone who did it and did it well, let's just share that out. But so I mean, I really appreciate the comment, because I do. I think there's a relevancy there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Any other questions at the elementary level before we move into the secondary one?
Yeah, Dr. Stoker, yeah, we have some comments on the YouTube chat that I would just like to read off.
Sure.
They're very similar to what Mr. Kern had said. Mr. Andreas Hassold, he said there's standardization around communication is still a big topic. And then he said overall the meeting was good. The explanations would have been nice to have at the start of school, and communication didn't go out to all the parents. And then he also reiterated that typing is a big issue for students. Those are the comments that were in the YouTube chat.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I think we've addressed some of those, but obviously the feedback that we're getting from families and from family members for whoever is working with a student, all of that helps inform our practice, and we continue to try to make it better. We're navigating some of these things for the first time, just like all the families are, at the education or in the buildings. So we're trying to be responsive to the needs that are out there. So please continue to give us that feedback, and we will continue to try to put out videos, workshops, whatever we can to help families, so we can all get through this together.
And one other comment, if I might add, he also said that elementary students who receive reading intervention get actual books to bring home for reading. Why can't all students for Wonders get books for home use?
Scott, do you want to address that?
So I'm not sure if that's specific to a particular building. At this point, we have offered to send home books for Wonders across the board. So I think intervention, we're not using the books as often because we are doing a lot of that in the school building. But I can't speak.
Tanya, you got cut off.
Yeah, it seems like Mr. Pine may have
It looks
lost.
like he froze.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Dr. Stoker.
So I would just respond on Mr. Pine's behalf that we do have the books, to give to all of our students if they need them. So if there is a parent that's out there specifically that would like those books, please reach out to the principal and we can facilitate getting those books home to you. Okay, we're going to go ahead at this point and move into the secondary responses. So I believe
Dr.
Mrs.
Stoker, can I interrupt one more?
Sure.
This is based on a topic that Mr. Link touched on. Ashley King had a question. It says, if the hybrid students have to go all virtual, will it be similar to what the virtual students are doing now with the teachers on Zoom doing lessons?
So we're continuing to work through those conversations. If we have to go 100% remote instruction, we are going to have to tweak some things. We're not ready to release just yet exactly what that's going to look like. But part of the expectation is going to be that during that time, teachers do what they can to have more direct face time with the students in an online environment, 5 days a week.
Okay, at this point, we'll go ahead and transition into the secondary responses. So Mrs. Chamberlain and I believe Mr. Hauser are both on to talk regarding secondary. So Mrs. Chamberlain, I'll hand it over to you at this point.
Okay, we did not get as many responses with regards to confusion or with the Google Classroom, I think, as the elementary. Anytime we had any issues or a parent had a question, it was dealt with directly, one-on-one, either with Mrs. Brown or the teacher themselves. So at this time, in fact, and I just actually concurred with Mrs. Brown this morning that we haven't had many parents reaching out to us, because I think once you get to that older level, the kids kind of own it. They teach their parents themselves because they are comfortable with the Google Classroom after having done it now for at least a year and a half to 2 years, because they started it in 6th grade. So I'm looking at a 7th grader, and even the 7th and 8th graders are very comfortable with Google Classroom and negotiating how the Google Classroom works and talking parents through it at this time. So that's what we have found out. We have teachers who have created videos to walk their parents through it to help the kids and shared that out. And as Dr. Stoker had said earlier, we're collecting all that data to see how many videos there are in the building. Mr. Hauser?
Yeah, something very similar at the high school. We're finding a lot more independence just due to the age of our students. One thing we are doing to help out is, as I get questions about attendance or grades or what have you, I find myself on a case-by-case basis walking some parents through situations where the student might need a little bit more parental oversight. Those are, it sounds like, more few and far between than what we're seeing at the elementary level. But at the high school level, we are using 2 platforms. We're using the Canvas platform, and we're also using the Google Classroom, with Google Classroom being the one that is more commonly used. And our students, for the most part, have a lot of familiarity in working with both of those platforms. But again, any assistance that is needed for families is coming on a case-by-case basis, typically when the need arises. I know the guidance counselors are helping with that. A lot of our professional development presently is centered around how to organize the virtual space to make things more accessible, make directions more easily read, make things a little bit more user friendly, regardless of the type of virtual space that is in play.
Thank you, Mrs. Chamberlain and Mr. Hauser. Mr. Hauser, I think you make a good point, and I think this carries over to the elementary as well, that you talked about teachers looking at others' Google Classrooms to try to make them more similar. That's something that we're also doing at the elementary level, and in November at our in-service day, that's something that we're going to spend some time on, is teachers talking about their Google Classrooms and looking across different grade levels, different content areas to try to make them as similar as we can, so that any families that are accessing those are finding things in similar locations, so that they don't have to, if they have 4 children and they're using multiple Google Classrooms at different levels, that they're not trying to have to find things, that those things are similar, are in similar locations, so there's more ease of access for that. So good points. Thank you very much. Any questions at the secondary level?
I'm going to ask if all the principals can send me their talking points for this evening so I can incorporate them into the meeting notes. So if you can please send those to me by sometime tomorrow, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, not hearing any questions on that topic, we'll go ahead and move into Math 180. I'll hand it over to Mrs. Dada.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to give you a little overview of Math 180. Most of you know that we have started Read 180 about 4 years ago. We've seen great results with it and with the TSI at the high school and other marginal work with most of our teachers are taking the regular education curriculum and adapting and modifying that. We don't really have a math replacement curriculum to help boost them to get more than 1 grade level so that we can get them back into the regular classroom and working on the regular level. So one of the things is looking at Math 180. I've been looking at a replacement curriculum for a little while. With the new Special Ed COVID Impact Grant, that gave me some money to help fund the Math 180. It is a evidence-based and standards-based curriculum. It is set up a lot like Read 180, where you have 3 groups. You start as a whole group, you then break into 3 smaller groups, you do some independent work, you do some small group with the teacher directed, and then you also have a computer-aided program. The computer-aided program, as you know, with this virtual right now, would be a big benefit for our students because it is at their level. They work self-directed at home if they're on a hybrid schedule at this point. And then at the end of that lesson, they all come back together, review, and look at what they've learned, and any, teacher can self-check to make sure that the students have learned the concept and move on from there. It also has the same dashboard as Math 180 or as Read 180, which allows the testing quarterly as well as progress monitoring for IEP goals. And that will then help the teachers progress monitor, direct their instruction towards areas of need, and help our students in that way. When I did do the proposal from HMH, which is the Houghton Mifflin Company, which is Math 180, they came back, the best price was actually a 3-year price. And I can now still support it with the medical access money because the COVID grant will not pay for the entire portion of it. Because it's a program that you have to do consecutive years, it's not something that I would just want to do 1 year with the COVID grant and then not do the following years. So this will kind of allow us to get all the materials, and then we will just have to support the licensing from year to year. Does anybody have any questions? Great. I think this is going to, I'm really excited. I'm really happy it's the same platform. I think the teachers are comfortable with what we're doing with Read 180. So this should be an easier way to implement. My plan for implementing is actually not doing it this year, but to do some of the training at the end of this year so that we could implement the start of next year. I don't really want to start something brand new at this point. I think everybody is doing a great job with what they already have and don't really need to learn another program, or not really another program, but another curriculum right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Dada. And one additional topic under the education section, I just want to send out a reminder to everybody that's on the call and everyone watching on YouTube that at our board meeting next Monday night, we will be doing our annual data presentation. So that's just a reminder that we'll be going through some of the topics discussed this evening, but also all of the data that we have, which isn't as much as is in typical years, but we'll have all of the state assessment data, local assessment data that we have from last year that we'll be discussing. So something to look forward to for next board meeting as well. Anybody have anything else under the education section of the agenda for this evening? Mr. Hill, are there any other questions under the education section?
We don't have any other questions, just a couple comments. Mr. Hassold said that was great to hear. This is a type of standardization is what we were asking for. And Ashley King said that the third grade's Google Classroom setup has been great and it's easy to navigate. So we just had a couple comments.
Okay, thank you to the parents for those, and thank you, Mr. Hill, for sharing those. Moving into the policy section this evening, we have 4 policies that are on tonight's agenda. Many of the policies that you'll see coming up this month and in a couple months after are all related to COVID. So there's been a lot of updates that PSBA has been pushing out and suggesting that we make or requiring that we make for changes in the law that are related to COVID. So you're going to see many of those this evening. So our first policy is policy 340. Before I jump into the actual policy, you will probably notice that this looks different than it typically does. We have decided to use a new format to do our revisions to our policies. You'll see red for strike-throughs for any of the language that's been removed from the policies or that is being recommended that be removed. And you'll see green is the new language. You'll also see on top we have draft in red, and then you'll see in the title draft, and then also the status will be first reading, second reading, whatever we're happen to be showing for that month. The reason that we did this is we can actually use PSBA's platform rather than a Word document to do the updates, and then it just translates over much easier for PSBA and the back end of things when they have to look at the updates, approve them, and then we post these to our board docs. So just some changes that you may recognize as we go through. So our first policy this evening, 340, is responsibility for student welfare. This is being updated for some stricter language. So things that have been previously listed as optional, PSBA is now suggesting that they be included. Student welfare is not just an in-person responsibility for our staff, but it's also in the virtual environment. And that's where many of these updates are coming from. So in the first section, you'll see that where it says each employee shall, it's now saying that they are responsible. So there's much more strict language. Instead of it being responsibilities, they're now directives. So there's just more strict language that's been suggested by PSBA. When you go further down, in this line, you'll say each employee is responsible to ensure the students are supervised by a teacher or other staff member at all times while engaged in district activities. That includes, again, the virtual environment. So it's not just in-person learning, but also within the virtual setting. She and he have been removed and replaced with employee. Throughout many of these policies, you'll also see where we refer to the board-approved health and safety plan. So that's been incorporated into many of the policies that we'll cover tonight and moving forward as well, because that's not something that previously had to be considered in education. Further down, in that second to last paragraph on the first page, it talks about who to report to and what to report. So it's going, any reports for child welfare will go to the building principal or a designated staff, and that they should immediately be addressed with regard to any violations or our safety rules. Obviously, if there's any concerns with regard to Act 126 violations, those get reported directly as well. In the last line on page 1, also again, it's more specific. Previously, it talked about being permitted. Now it says authorized by the building principal or designee. On the last page, employees shall not require a student to perform work or, and that was changed to services, that may be detrimental to the student's health. So again, just more specific language that we're seeing in this policy rather than recommendations or shall, it's now must or is. Any questions on this policy? Not hearing any. Do we have the board members that are present this evening? Do we have a recommendation to move this for a first reading to the board meeting next week?
Bob Keegan, so moved.
No objections from Michelle Heckman.
No objections from Michelle Martineau either.
Mr. Kern?
That's fine. It's all good.
Mr. Fedorcha?
We will move it.
Dr. Stoker, you can go ahead and put that on for first reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second policy this evening is facilities and workplace safety. This policy is being updated so that it's focusing on referencing the provisions of board-approved health and safety plans and integrating those plans within the school entity's overall safety rules and strategies. Again, this is a policy that's recommended by PSBA in general for legal liability purposes, but the updates that are being made are related to COVID. So on the first page, you'll see that we are prioritizing the safety of students, staff, and visitors. So as we move forward with any of the modes of education, there's obviously that balance between educating students, but also keeping them safe while they're in our facilities. Further down, there's a reference here to federal, state, and local guidelines. So as things come out through the Pennsylvania Department of Health, through PDE, through any of the organizations that we look to for guidance, that information has been incorporated in here as well. And again, discussing our health and safety plan. Under delegation of responsibility, this policy for the most part in the past has really related to facilities. So everything that was delegated for the most part ran through the Director of Support Services. However, now that it also incorporates the health and safety plan, which is coming under the direction of the superintendent and the board, the delegation of responsibility falls to the superintendent or the designee, which remains the Director of Support Services or anyone else that's deemed necessary. So that's been updated. It's been updated again to include rules of health and safety plans as necessary, and then that changes will be communicated out. So if we update our health and safety plan, if we change modes of education, anything that's going to impact changes that are happening under COVID, that those need to be communicated out to the school community. It also includes that there'll be signage. So if you come to visit our buildings, you'll notice that there's signage on the door that you need to fall in line with the health and safety plan, keeping your masks on and things of that nature if you are visiting the building. Further down under the regulations, this still had information in here about how we access the buildings. So it did have swipe cards in here. They have since been updated to key fobs. So we did change that language. And then we are using a new visitor identification system called the Raptor system. But that's something that we've decided earlier today that we may change that language out and not make it specific, but we're going to make it general to using a visitor identification system. On the last page, the Certified Safety Committee, this language was included. A workplace safety committee shall be established to promote the district's goals concerning safe schools. We did not include that last time because we already do have a safety committee. However, it's language that PSBA recommends having in here if for some reason you don't have a committee. However, we do have a committee. Mr. Durr indicated that we've had a committee for about the past 5 or 6 years that meets typically about once a month. So we already do have that committee. However, we did include that language. Throughout the policy, it does refer to the safety committee. PSBA has updated that to be the workplace safety committee. I think the reasoning behind that is to keep it separate from like a safe schools committee where we're talking about school violence and keeping our students safe through first responders. This is more about the physical health and safety of our buildings themselves. And those are the rest of the changes. You'll just see the workplace has been added throughout the bottom of that policy. Any questions on policy 705? Not hearing any, do we have the board members in attendance recommendation to move it to the board meeting for next week for a first reading?
Gary, yes.
Bob Keegan, yes.
Michelle Heckman, yes.
Michelle
Kern,
Martineau, yes.
Dr. Stoker, it sounds like board approval. Go ahead and to move it to the agenda for next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next policy is policy 803. This relates to school calendar. As you're aware that we need to have 180 days of school, and depending on whether it's elementary or high school or elementary or secondary, we need either 900 hours of school or 990 hours of school for the entire school year. With regard to COVID, that has changed. There's more flexibility. We had essentially a waiver for last school year to not have those requirements. Moving into this year, it needs to be in board policy to work around those if necessary based on any COVID or school closings or whatever mode of education we find ourselves in. So this policy will cover any changes that happen to that. So under authority, you'll see that they talk about remote guidance from PDE, access, and essentially completion of assignments that we are going to take attendance for students. And what qualifies as an instructional day or instructional time could be different. It's not students fully in person 180 days for those 190 or 900 hours or 990 hours, that there is flexibility based upon this policy and any emergencies we find ourselves in. Further down, it talks about when an emergency arises, that we do have the temporary provisions for the days and hours as described. And then if you look at number 1, 2, and 3 there, it talks about number 1, we have some flexibility with the amount of days, not having to necessarily have the 180 days. Number 2, with the length of the day, we can potentially reduce the length of time or daily instruction for particular courses and classes. And then number 3 talks about remote. So we are able to implement remote or other alternative methods for delivering that instruction under the certified teachers that we have. Under the bottom section, delegation of responsibility, this just says that we have to continue to document this. If we do make any changes in those 3 areas that we just discussed, that still has to be submitted to Pennsylvania Department of Education through the mandatory means that we typically have to do. So that's it for this policy. Any questions regarding that? Not hearing any, do we have permission for the board to move that to the board meeting for a first reading next week?
Gary, yes.
Bob Keegan, yes.
Michelle Martineau, yes.
Bob Kern, yes.
Michelle Heckman, yes.
Dr. Stoker, that's board approval to move that to next week's board meeting.
Thank you very much. The last policy that we have on here for this evening is policy 907, which is regard to school visitors. This one has been revised to address limiting visitors to the designated areas or limiting the number of visitors when necessary to protect the health and safety of students, staff, and the school community. Language was added overall to directing visitors to provide information and identification if required to protect the health and safety of students, staff, and the public in school buildings. This is not a policy that is required. It is one that is recommended, but it is one that we've had since 1997 when we adopted it. So we did update it to include the guidance that we've received from PSBA. So under delegation of responsibility, you'll see that the superintendent or designee, including the principals, may limit visitors to designated areas or may limit the number of visitors to the district when it's necessary to protect the health and safety of our students, staff, and the public. So that this policy is allowing us to do that. Under the guidelines section, that they may need to provide information about the health and safety of their person in order to enter some of our buildings. So for instance, when we're scanning people's temperatures or things of that nature, asking questions regarding safety and them entering the building, things in accordance with our health and safety plan, that we have the right to ask some of those questions for the protection of the people in our buildings. We did talk earlier that we are using a Raptor system, so that is going to begin the second quarter of the school year. If we do have any visitors coming into our buildings, you'll be asked to show your ID. That'll be scanned through our system, and we do check that against Megan's Law. We did talk about removing the word Raptor here and putting in here just a general visitor management system in case we ever do change that system. But that's something that we purchased through a grant, through our Safe Schools grant last year. We trained everybody up to use that, but unfortunately, we were looking to roll that out in March, and then we ended up closing schools and not having visitors in our buildings. So now that we're having some limited visitors come in, we're looking to roll that out the second quarter. On the second page, it does say here that we can limit, or that we do limit, the entrances to our buildings. So if you go to any of our buildings, you typically have to buzz in at the front office, and then you enter in, and then you'll be scanned through the Raptor system. So once the start of the school day happens, we have limited entrance areas, and those are monitored. And then at the very bottom of this, there was a section that PSBA recommended adding for military personnel, that members of the active or retired armed forces are able to be permitted into buildings. to visit and meet with district employees or students in compliance with our board policies, and that they are allowed to wear official military uniforms while on district property. So this is all regarding any school visitors that we have. Again, it was updated for COVID situations for our health and safety plan, but there were some additional changes that PSBA recommended as they were updating it. Any questions on that policy?
Just to confirm, Dr. Stoker, you are looking to keep the Raptor system listed in there, or are you looking to change that wording when we see it first reading, if we approve it for Monday?
Sure, good question. So we are currently using the Raptor system. That is a system that we use, but should we ever change that, we think it would be best to keep that general. So we are going to put visitor management system and change that out for the next time that you see it at the board level, if it goes there.
Thank you. Board members, any other questions? If not, any discussion or approval to move this for reading during our meeting in Monday?
Gary, move it.
Michelle Martineau, yes.
Bob Keegan, yes.
Bob Kern, yes.
Michelle Heckman, yeah.
Thank you, board members. Dr. Stoker, will approve that one for board reading on Monday.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a look ahead, we do have additional policies that will be coming out. The next set of policies will be policies related to medical and health. We have our school nurses looking at those on the in-service day and going through some of the changes as well to put a different look on it and lens through some of those policies. So the next set that you'll be getting for COVID updates will be related to medical and health as well. So that's all we have on the agenda this evening. Does anyone have anything else for policy? Or Mr. Hill, are there any questions from the public?
Yes, Dr. Stoker. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Michelle. I just wanted to, just as a comment, the new format for the policy readings was really easy to read. So I appreciate it, and I'm glad it works for PSBA too.
Good, thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Stoker. We do have one more question related to education that I'd like to ask from our YouTube chat. It is from Andreas Hassold, and he said, when students stay home out of precaution, but they still complete their work at home online, why are they being marked absent? And can you explain this conflict?
I would say it's down to an individual basis, depending on why we're being told from the parent or guardian why they're staying home. We have a number of different filters that we run those reasons through in alignment with PA school code and our attendance policy and what's required through student attendance improvement plans. I'm going to ask that Mr. Hauser, who is our district administrator responsible for attendance policies and updates, to kind of weigh in on this as well. So Mr. Hauser, if you want to respond to that question as well.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Link. Thank you for the question. So the guidance that we got from the Department of Education and how to interpret this particular section of the PA school code and how to apply district policy to it says that if a student is assigned to be in person on a particular day, they're physically present in the building, or they're supposed to be, we have to treat their attendance as we normally would. So the student will show up physically, be marked, present or absent by the teachers, just as though things were quote unquote normal. If the student is supposed to be virtual on a given day, that's where the districts can define what attendance actually looks like. And here at Northern Lehigh, we have that defined as participating in some sort of learning activity. My advice to this situation, because these are going to be very unique to individual families and individual students, is to simply communicate with your building principal or particularly your school nurse. If your child is staying home as a precautionary measure because your child is exhibiting some sort of symptoms that the district has said, if you have these, please stay home for a day. please communicate that with the school nurse, because if that is the case and the district is telling you, please participate virtually this day, or you can't physically come in, there's much more flexibility in how we can apply certain attendance protocols there. Okay, if we're saying you can't come into the building that day, we can do a little bit more. Typically, too, what we're asking is that parents commit to a certain length of time on their learning model. At the high school and the middle school, and I believe this is also the elementary schools as well, we're asking for minimally a 2-week commitment to either fully virtual or the hybrid. And then parents and students can evaluate, does this learning model work for them? And they can choose to go either way, depending on what you're seeing and what you're comfortable with. But the biggest thing, because a lot of this is very unique to the student and to the family, is to communicate with your building principal and your school nurse so that the situation can be evaluated on a case-by-case basis and see which parts of the policy apply to that situation.
Thank you. I think that was a great explanation, and Andreas said that clarification helps. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, and thank you, Mr. Hauser and Mr. Link. Any other questions on the agenda this evening?
This is Gary, not a question, but because some people are not aware that we will not have a policy meeting next month because December's we do not. Our next one will be January. Just want to remind everybody who's not familiar with that.
Thank you, Mr. Fedorcha.
And that will hold true for all committee meetings. There will be no committee meetings at all in the month of December.
Dr. Stoker, I did have a question, and it kind of ties to both education and to the school calendar policy, I guess. Unfortunately, we turned the calendars to November. Matt, I like hearing your voice, but I don't like hearing it at 6 o'clock in the morning. So hate to bring up that S word, but I know there, obviously at the start of the call, we said there's the possibility of going all virtual, and what does that look like? And if we stay hybrid through the winter months, has there been any discussion on what does that look like for snow days for students who are going into school or not, or what does that look like and how does that tie into our plans? And I guarantee you guys are thinking about it, just looking for some community input on that.
Sure. So last week, and actually the week prior to that, we started reaching out to PDE. I did for Northern Lehigh. Dr. Ibe did as well, as a representative to all the districts in CLIU 21. And the feedback that we received was that as long as we are operating under our health and safety plans, which would be as long as really the governor has the emergency declaration in place, that if we need to close buildings due to weather, that we can actually just roll right into a fully online instructional day under our health and safety plan. So that means that we can still offer students a virtual instruction that day, and it would not be a loss of an instructional day, which means that we would not have to alter our calendar, say like shorten a holiday break or add school days on to the end of the school year. So as of now, anytime that we would have to close a school because of weather, because of snow, ice, whatever it may be, really it almost seems like any event, any occurrence that would cause us to close the actual buildings, that we could roll right into an online instruction day under our health and safety plan. I'm not sure if that's going to upset or please the children, but we are allowed to do it.
Thank you for the update, Mr. Lang. Appreciate it.
Anything else before we look to close the agenda for this evening? Mrs. Husak, I would turn it over to you then if you'd like to adjourn our committee.
Sounds good. And just to piggyback on Mr. Fedorcha, just again, no committee meeting in December. Our next committee meeting is scheduled for Monday, January 4th at 5:30. most likely same venue as we're all sitting at today, but we'll see. But if not, I hope everybody stays safe. Thank you for everybody's time, and we'll move on to the community relations and close the education policy committee meeting for this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Susak. We just have two quick agenda items for community relations tonight. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. I know it's dark out, thanks to the clocks changing. The first item is Mr. Link. I think this is your item. I had a question regarding the update for the Northern Lehigh Recreation Authority decision from the October Slatington Borough Council meeting. If you could provide just a little bit of background about what that was, and if you have any update on their decision.
Sure. So during the same night as our October school board meeting, the Borough of Slatington held their borough council meeting, and one of the agenda items on their agenda was the funding, or to defund or to decrease funding from the Borough of Slatington to the Northern Lehigh Recreation Authority. The Northern Lehigh Recreation Authority has been a great community partner of the Northern Lehigh School District. You know, we believe that we hold a lot of the same core values, which is to support children in the community and really residents of all ages. The outcome of that meeting was that they decreased the funding to the Northern Lehigh Recreation Authority, but they did not eliminate the funding. So I forget how much they decreased it to. To my knowledge, Washington Township and the Borough of Walnutport continued, they agreed to continue the funding at the level that it was last approved. So the funding has not been eliminated across the board. However, it will have an operating impact on Northern Lehigh Recreation Authority and the programs that they offer to residents of all ages. Northern Lehigh School District, you know, our plan is to continue to work collaboratively with Northern Lehigh Recreation Authority. Although we do not finance them in any way, we do support a lot of the activities that they offer. For instance, if they're going to host something in a community, in particular, if it's something that involves children, we'll use our community outreach system to get the information out there. So there's a way that we can support them that's not costing us any money. We just help, you know, put the news out there of the events that they're offering. In the summer, unfortunately, we could not do it this past summer because of the pandemic, but traditionally and historically, we have offered them the use of one, sometimes two of our elementary buildings to host their summer rec programs. So there's a way that we're supporting them, but not in a way that we're out, you know, providing finances to them. My hope is that if we are able to, you know, open our buildings again in the summer, that we would continue to offer them the use of our facilities. They're actually designated right in our facility use policy as one of the local community groups that does not have to pay a fee to use our facilities. You know, so that was the outcome of that meeting. That's the plan of the partnership between NLRA and NLSD moving forward. You know, and I truly do believe that they offer a lot of great opportunities, learning opportunities, and safe events for, in particular, the children of the district, but again, really all the residents.
Thank you, Mr. Link. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Bob Keegan, is there a reason why they're reducing their funding?
Sure, Mr. Keegan. Really what it comes down to is their concern for their budget and their finances moving forward, not only through this current year and stressors that have been put on, you know, the borough and residents due to the pandemic, but what that could potentially mean for their budget in years to come. When they look at it as the per capita kind of donation model, or not donation model, but fee model. And, I guess when they ran their numbers, they saw that it would increase their funds directed towards the NLRA to the level that they thought they could not support, at the current level. It was a financial decision.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Link, I wanted to thank you too for the lovely letter you wrote them on behalf of the district, because I do think that the NLRA provides an advantage to our students and to our community at large. And I'm, sad to hear that there was a decrease, but relieved that the council hasn't closed the door on the authority altogether. So I hope that we can all weather these financial troubles from this pandemic together. And thanks again.
Sure. Thank you.
If there's nothing else, the last item was one that I requested, and it is just to simply discuss adding a standing item to the public agenda boilerplates for all the committee agendas that mirrors the board meeting agenda recreation of guests. I'd like to make sure that an official question section to the agendas is added so that no one misses checking the chat for community input. I called it catching up to the new normal. We all have been pretty good about doing that, but we did, I think, have one email where a question might have been missed. And I just wanted to make sure that the committee agendas reflected sort of that section of the board agenda. Does anybody have any suggestions or ideas or comments regarding that?
No, this is Gary. I agree with that, Ms. Martineau, and really, it can be a bullet item at the bottom, recognizing any guests. I think it's a great idea. It's a good reminder, if nothing else. Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Fedorcha. Mr. Link, is this something that we can tack on to all of these? Is it an easy add-on?
So the answer to that is yes, it's an easy add-on. I would recommend, though, that we ask the same question at the Wednesday night committee members and let their committee chairs and membership discuss it as well.
Great, good idea. Okay.
So I'll put a notation here to add that to the Wednesday evening agendas.
Thanks so much, Mr. Link.
Sure.
And with that, Mr. Hill, do we have any questions or comments from the internet?
Yes, perfect timing. Thank you. Andreas Hassold asked if there is any update on winter sports such as basketball for NLYAA for the Youth League.
Sure, so I can address that. We are currently working through our school district level winter sport plan, not only for Northern Lee High School District, but in conjunction with the Colonial League. The Colonial League has started their meetings last week. We'll continue through this week. And then that topic, Mr. Mr. Hassold, is an agenda item at the Facilities Committee meeting this upcoming Wednesday. So that's actually an agenda item Wednesday evening at the Buildings and Grounds Committee, rather. So I would suggest that you tune in Wednesday evening for that conversation.
Mr. Link, this is Gary. If we go to totally virtual, which means we close our building, does that then close all sports?
I think the logic is there. I can tell you that the response that we're going to get from PDE, the Department of Health, and probably PIAA will be consistent with their past messages that it's a local decision, and then we will need to make that decision. I believe if we're being told by the Department of Education and our state Department of Health that we should be shutting down our schools for learning, I think the logic is that we should be doing the same for extra and co-curriculars. It would be hard for me to justify anything else to you as school board members.
Mr. Link, this is Mrs. Martineau. Does our county's increased designation, does that change any of the guidelines for number of people in, for example, in our stadium, like for the playoffs or anything like that?
It has not. Those guidelines for capacity and building occupancy or venue occupancy, it's all very disjointed. That actually comes right from the governor's office, probably in consultation with the Department of Health. But they're not necessarily tied directly to PDE's recommendations or PIAA's recommendations. So no, if we were to go into, I have not received any communication, and I was in a meeting with PDE and the Department of Health this morning, that if we were to decide to go fully remote, that it alters any of those occupancy limits set forth by the governor, which was updated a few weeks ago. Although it kind of takes us back to, if we are ordered to go, or rather, if they recommend we go fully remote, and then the decision is to go fully remote, I don't know how we could be, opening up our buildings or our stadium to host large events.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you very much for that
Sure.
clarification. Does anybody have anything else? Mr. Hill, are we good with the internet?
We are good. No more questions. Thank you.
Dr. Stoker?
Yes.
I stepped on you on the way in. I wanted to make sure I didn't do it on the way out.
Nope, you are good.
Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting and hope everybody stays well. And see you next time. I think our next community relations is in February, correct?
That's correct.
It is February 1st.
Thank you very much. February 1st. So we'll see you then. Same bat time, same bat channel. Everybody stay well.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Have a good
Good night,
evening.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.